The courtyard torches burned low as Arya stepped through the archway, her basket of supplies on her arm, and a rare laugh slipping free at something the dark-haired stranger beside her said. He stood too close for a man she'd just met, boots nearly brushing her skirts, relaxed and unafraid in a place where even nobles moved carefully. For once, no one was shouting orders or looking straight through her. For once, she let herself feel like more than an invisible maid. Then the gate chains rattled. Riders poured into the courtyard, leather and steel catching the last streaks of sunset. At their head rode Alpha King Damian, cloak thrown back, eyes hard from patrol. His gaze swept the stones in one sharp pass and halted on Arya, standing too close to an unknown male, smiling in a way she never did near him. He dismounted without a word. Each measured step toward them tightened the air, conversations dying as people realized exactly where the king's attention had fixed. Damian stopped a pace away, golden eyes locked on Arya's face, his voice low and dangerous as it broke the silence. "Who is he?" Arya felt the stranger's shoulder tense beside her, but he didn't step back. The whole courtyard seemed to draw in a breath and hold it, waiting. "An old friend, your majesty," the man said, voice smooth, unhurried. "From the border villages." Damian did not look at him. His gaze stayed locked on Arya's face, heavy as a hand around her throat. Up close, the color of his eyes was more molten than gold, flecks of amber catching the torchlight as if something inside was burning hotter than his tight control allowed. "Is that true?" he asked her quietly. Arya's tongue felt thick. The bitter tang of herbs had coated her mouth all day. Now it seemed to glue her words together. She forced her chin up, just enough to meet his eyes without appearing to challenge him. "Yes, my lord," she said. "We knew each other as children." A flicker of something passed over Damian's features' relief, then something darker. "Children," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "And now he appears in my courtyard without sending word ahead, walking at your side like he belongs here." The stranger Kieran, Arya's mind supplied, remembering the name he'd given her at the market, offered a lazy shrug. "I sent word ahead. Perhaps your messengers are slower than mine." Damian's attention cut to him then, sharp enough to slice. "You stand on my land and insult my people?" "Observation, not insult." Kieran's smile tilted. "I rode hard. Maybe my letter didn't." "This is a closed castle. Even allies announce themselves at the gate," Damian said. "Yet the first I hear of your presence is when I see you with one of my servants." He said servant, but the way his jaw clenched on the word made it sound like something else entirely. Arya tried to step back, to give them space, but Damian's hand lifted almost imperceptibly. She stopped on instinct, heat prickling under her skin at the unspoken command. Kieran's eyes didn't miss the gesture. They narrowed, thoughtful. "I meant no disrespect," Kieran said. "I saw a familiar face in a foreign market and thought I'd say hello. You remember what that's like, surely. Before you were king, you were just another wolf in a crowded hall. Don't presume you remember anything about me," Damian said, voice going flat. "On the contrary," Kieran's gaze swept him boldly. "I remember more than you'd like." The power rolling off Damian thickened the air. For a heartbeat, Arya thought he might order Kieran seized, thrown in chains. Instead, he turned that burning gaze back on her. "When did you last see him?" he asked. Arya swallowed. "Years ago, before I came here." "What were the circumstances?" His tone hardened slightly. "Why did you leave your village?" Every muscle in her body wanted to flinch away. She kept still by force of will alone. "My position there ended," she said carefully. "I came north looking for work. The steward here took me on." "Your position ended," Damian echoed. "That's a pretty way of saying you ran." His head tipped just enough that, to anyone watching from a distance, he looked merely curious. Only up close could Arya see the anger stirring under the surface. "Why?" Kieran made a soft sound. "Now, that's her story to tell, not yours to drag out of her in the courtyard like a confession. You're not part of this conversation," Damian snapped without looking at him. Yet, guards along the wall shifted their weight. The horses stamped nervously. Even the flames on the torches seemed to lean inward, drawn to the vortex of tension gathering around the three of them. Arya curled her fingers tighter around the basket to hide the way they shook. "It was an arranged match, my lord," she said, the familiar lie slipping into place. Quick, simple, close enough to the truth to slide past most noses. "One I did not want, so I left." Damian's eyes narrowed. "And he?" His gaze flicked briefly to Kieran. "What part did he play?" "None," Arya said, perhaps too quickly. "He only saw me leave." Kieran's mouth curved. "I offered to help." he corrected lightly. She refused, always too proud to owe anyone. Damien's stare cut back to him, cold as the northern sea. And now, years later, you arrive in my territory, ignore protocol, and just happen to find her in a crowded market? Not crowded, Kieran said, and some faces are hard to forget. Damien's hand flexed at his side, like he was fighting the urge to hit something. Or someone. Arya watched the movement, aware of a strange answering pulse low in her own body. Her wolf stirred uneasily beneath the herbs. You will be escorted to the guest wing, Damien said at last, each syllable edged. We'll discuss your reasons for coming here in the morning, with proper introductions. Until then, you will not approach my staff without my permission. Kieran matched his stare, then inclined his head by a single fraction. As you wish, Your Majesty. He stepped back when the guards moved in, but his eyes found Arya one last time. There was no softness in them now, only a glint of calculation and something that might have been regret. Damien waited until they were halfway across the courtyard before he spoke again. Arya. Her name in his mouth did something to her, made her spine straighten, and her breath hitch in equal measure. Yes, my lord. Come. It wasn't an invitation. He turned and strode toward the side entrance that led to the inner keep, expecting her to follow. Arya's legs obeyed before her mind caught up, the way they had been trained to obey every order in this castle. The murmur of the courtyard rose behind them, speculation already blooming like rot in damp corners. The walk to his private study felt both far too long and not nearly long enough. Inside, the door thumped shut with a finality that made her pulse quicken. Damien didn't move for a moment, his hand still resting on the wood as if he needed it to stay upright. Then he turned. Every line of his body still coiled from the encounter. Put that down, he said, nodding at the basket. She set it carefully on a small table, suddenly acutely aware of how she must look. Plain dress, flower-dusted sleeves, hair braided for practicality, not beauty. Not like the polished court girls who angled for his attention. She folded her hands to keep from fidgeting. Come here. She obeyed, stopping a respectful distance from his desk. The study was warm from the banked fire, the air thick with parchment and ink and the faint pine and smoke scent that was uniquely his. It wrapped around her, making the room feel smaller. He leaned back against the edge of the desk, crossing his arms. Who is he really? I told you, she said softly. An old friend from my village. Do not lie to me, he cut in, not loud but sharp enough to sting. Out there, in front of the others, I let it pass. In here, it will not. Her throat tightened. I'm not lying about knowing him. You're lying about what he is to you. Damien's gaze raked her face as if trying to peel away her skin and see what sat beneath. You flinched when he spoke about your past. Your heart rate spiked when I asked how you left. I could hear it from 10 paces away. She hadn't realized he noticed those things. Of course he did. Wolves tracked prey by subtler signs than that. He's nothing to me now, Arya said. Whatever we were as children ended the night I left. I haven't spoken to him since. And why did you leave? He pressed. Arya felt the old panic rise, the memories she kept buried clawing at their cage, the elders' voices, the weight of expectation, the cold knowledge of what her first heat would mean in a pack that saw omegas as breeding stock rather than people. She swallowed it all down with the bitter taste of herbs. I told you, she said. There was a match. I didn't want it. I ran. And he let you go? Damien asked. Just watched you walk away from everything? Packs do not usually allow that. His mouth twisted. Or is the eastern wild so lax with its omegas that they can simply wander off when they please? The word omega landed between them like a stone dropped in a deep well. Arya's heart lurched. Had he guessed? Could he smell it? Even through all the herbs? She kept her voice measured. The elders made decisions I couldn't live with. Leaving was the only way. Kieran was just there, Damien repeated softly, as if he didn't believe in accidents. And now he's here, watching you, testing my patience. He pushed off the desk and paced once, the predator in him looking for somewhere to put all that restless energy. Arya tracked him with her eyes despite herself. He moved like the stories people whispered, easy and lethal, the calm center of a storm. You've been in my household 3 years, he said. In all that time, you've never asked for special treatment, never caused trouble, never given me reason to question your loyalty. He stopped in front of her again. Until now, shame burned her cheeks. I didn't plan for this, my lord. I went to the market. He found me. I can't control who rides through your gates. No, he agreed. but I can control who stands at your side. His gaze held hers, unflinching. From this moment on, you will not be alone with him. If he speaks to you, you will answer politely and leave. If he tries to follow, you will tell me. That will make him an enemy. She pointed out before she could stop herself. He arrived that way, Damien said, whether he admits it yet or not. Silence stretched, taut as a pulled bowstring. Arya's lungs began to ache. She realized she'd been breathing shallowly, trying not to drag too much of his scent into her chest. Why does it matter? She asked finally, the question slipping out in a bare whisper. I'm just a servant. His eyes flared. Do you truly believe that? What else would I be? His hand moved so fast she almost missed it. Not to strike, but to catch her chin in his fingers, tipping her face up until she could see nothing but him. For 3 years, he said slowly, I have watched you move through these halls like a ghost. Efficient, silent, always a step back from everyone else. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, not quite a caress. I have seen you carry trays too heavy for your frame without complaint. Seen you stand in drafts so others can warm their hands by the fire. Seen you swallow words when lesser men spoke down to you. Her chest tightened. She hadn't known he saw any of that. And I have told myself, over and over, that you are just another servant, he continued, voice roughening. Because that was easier, safer, for both of us. Safer how? She whispered. His gaze dropped to her mouth for a heartbeat before snapping back up. You don't want the answer to that. She did. God's help her, she did. But some truths, once spoken, could never be unsaid. And there was already too much between them that danced on the edge of unforgivable. He released her abruptly and stepped back. From now on, you'll be assigned to the royal wing, he said, slipping back into the formal cadence of command as if nothing had happened. You'll report directly to my steward and, when required, to me. Your previous duties in the lower halls are reassigned. Her stomach dropped. My lord, that isn't necessary. It is, he cut in. If Kieran sought you once, he'll do it again. I won't have him prowling the servant corridors unsupervised. Reassigning me will draw attention, she tried. People will talk. They already are, he said. I'd rather control the story than chase rumors. What story will you give them? That you've proven yourself reliable. His mouth quirked into something like a smile. Promotion for good service. No one will question it loudly. They all want to believe hard work might earn them the same. It won't, she said before she could stop herself. No, he agreed quietly. It won't. But it will explain why you suddenly sleep behind thicker walls. He held her gaze. You will move your belongings to the upper corridor by tonight. Guard will be posted at your door. You will not leave the inner castle without permission. Do you understand? The walls closed in around her with every word. Still, she nodded. Yes, my lord. Good. He hesitated, some unspoken thing flickering in his eyes, then let it go. You may go. She reached for the basket, needing the familiar weight of it in her hands. At the door, something made her look back. He was watching her, shoulders rigid, jaw clenched. For a moment, she thought he might call her name again, undo the orders, let her slip back into blessed obscurity. He said nothing. Arya stepped into the corridor, the door closing softly behind her, and felt the shape of her life shift under her feet. By evening, the move was complete. Her new room sat at the end of the upper servants' corridor, one level below the king's chambers. The bed was wider, the blanket thicker. The single narrow window looked out over the inner courtyard, where torchlight now painted the stones in wavering amber. Voices drifted up from below, snatches of conversation carried on the night air. Did you see her with him? The stranger? They say the king nearly tore him apart. Promotion, they said, straight to the royal wing. For a kitchen girl? Please. Favorite? More like, maybe more, if she's clever. Arya shut the window and leaned her forehead against the cool stone. This was what she'd wanted to avoid. Eyes on her. Speculation. Being noticed for anything other than the efficiency of her work. She lifted her fingers to her throat, feeling the faint flutter of her pulse. The herbs still dulled her scent for now. But with Damien this close, with his attention this fixed, how long could that last? A soft knock sounded at her door. She stiffened. Yes? It's Lena, came the muffled reply. Another maid, one who'd shared a pallet with her for 2 years in the lower dormitory. I brought your extra blanket. Thought you might want something familiar. Arya opened the door. Lena stood there, arms full of worn wool, eyes wide with a mix of awe and worry. Is it true? Lena whispered as she stepped inside. About you and the king? There is nothing about me and the king, Arya said quickly. He needed someone he could trust in the royal wing. That's all. Trust, Lena echoed slowly. He doesn't even remember most of our names. But yours, he says, like a swear word and a prayer. She shook out the blanket, laying it carefully across the new bed. Just be careful. Men like him don't see the difference between protecting something and owning it. Arya thought of the way Damien had said, I won't have him near you. Of the iron in his voice, when he'd threatened Kieran. Of the way his hands had trembled slightly when he'd cupped her face. I know, she said quietly. When Lena left, Arya extinguished the lamp and lay down fully dressed, staring into the darkness. Faintly, through stone and space, she thought she heard footsteps pacing above her heavy, measured, back and forth. Damien. Sleep came slowly, dragged down by the weight of too many eyes, and one single, inescapable truth. Whatever she'd been before, nameless, safe, invisible, was gone. The Alpha King had drawn her closer to protect her from a stranger. But the most dangerous thing in this castle had never been Kieran. It was the way Damien's gaze followed her now, like a touch she could no longer pretend not to feel. By the next week, Kieran was no longer just a problem Damien intended to deal with later. He was a fixture. The announcement came at breakfast. Arya stood against the far wall of the private dining room, hands folded, trying not to stare at the way Damien's dark hair curled damply at the nape of his neck. He'd clearly come straight from the training yard, still in leather and linen, forearms bare and faintly bruised. The steward entered with a scroll and bowed low. A message from the council, Your Majesty. Damien broke the wax, skimmed the contents, and made a sound that might have been a growl. News? His advisor, Lord Rain, asked from the lower end of the table. Interference, Damien muttered. He flicked the parchment with 2 fingers. The council has decided that, in the spirit of cooperation, Alpha Kieran will remain as an official diplomatic guest while we explore opportunities for mutual benefit. Rain winced. They overruled your refusal? They did. Damien's jaw ticked. Apparently, refusing to host a visiting Alpha who crossed half the continent to strengthen ties looks bad, politically speaking. Arya watched the tendons in his hand flex around his knife. She didn't need wolf senses to feel how much the decision grated. As you wish, Your Majesty, Rain said carefully. It isn't what I wish, Damien said. It's what they wish. And I am apparently too valuable a figurehead to risk looking inhospitable. His gaze slid to Arya then, brief but scorching. She dropped her eyes at once, heat prickling her cheeks. When she refilled his cup, her hands were steady only because she willed them to be. Later that morning, she discovered what a diplomatic guest meant in practice. She was on her way from the royal wing to the upper kitchens with a list of special requests. Damien's requests. He'd decided the bread was too dry and the tea leaves too weak when Kieran appeared at the end of the corridor, walking the opposite way with 2 guards trailing him at a distance. Arya, he called, as if greeting an old friend in a village square, not a servant under watch in another Alpha's fortress. The guards straightened, glancing at her. Arya's instinct was to pretend she hadn't heard. Protocol and Damien's orders said, keep it polite, keep it brief, keep moving. She stopped, turned, and curtsied. Alpha Kieran. He smiled like the title amused him. You're a difficult woman to find. I've been working, she said. This wing is busy. I've noticed. His gaze drifted over the royal corridor with interest. Convenient, though. How your duties now keep you within a stone's throw of Damien's chambers. That's where I'm assigned, Arya said carefully. Of course it is. His eyes warmed with something like mischief. He always did like to keep valuable things close. The comment startled her, not because of what it implied about Damien, but because of what it implied about her. I'm not valuable? Kieran tipped his head. Arya, you ran from an arranged binding, survived alone in foreign territories, and somehow slipped into a king's household so quietly no one noticed what you were. You're the most valuable thing in this castle and they don't even know why. Her heart stuttered. I carry messages and pour wine. For now. He stepped closer by a fraction. Not enough to breach propriety under the guard's eyes, but enough that she could see the faint scar along his jaw she didn't remember from their youth. Walk with me. We can pretend I'm asking directions. That wouldn't be wise. Wise? His smile thinned. You think wise matters to Alphas with something they want? Her fingers tightened around the folded list. The king asked me to deliver this. I can't keep him waiting. At least you say the king and not Damien, Kieran murmured. That's something. He gestured down the hall. Go on then. We'll talk later. He let her pass, but she felt his gaze on her back all the way to the stairwell. It followed her into the kitchen, onto the stone, into the spaces inside her skull she'd carefully sealed with herbs and routine. They didn't talk later. They talked constantly. Not in long, private conversations. Damien's rules and the guards he'd posted made that difficult, but in dozens of stolen fragments, as if Kieran were weaving a net from stray threads. In the great hall, he would maneuver to be served last at the high table, so Arya assigned exclusively there now had to come to him. He'd ask for extra salt, a different wine, more bread, a fresh knife, each trivial request an excuse to draw her nearer. You never did like sitting still, he said one evening as she replaced his goblet. Always had to be moving, doing. Do you remember the old mill pond? You refused to sit on the bank with the others. Had to wade in up to your knees and help the water along. Arya's grip on the cup faltered for a fraction of a second. That was a long time ago. Not so long, he said. You looked smaller then, angrier. She set the cup down with more force than necessary. I have work. Of course you do. His eyes followed her as she retreated. You always did. In the galleries, when she dusted tapestries while court ladies strolled and gossiped, he would drift along the opposite side, admiring the artwork. You never told him about the binding, he said one afternoon, his voice low enough that only she heard it over the distant clatter from the training yard below, about how the elders saw your first heat like a ledger to be balanced. Stop, Arya hissed, fingers tightening in the tapestry's fringe. A guard posted at the end of the gallery watched them with bored disinterest. From where he stood, it was just an alpha and a servant sharing idle words. You don't know what I told him. I know him, Kieran said. He wears his feelings like armor. If he knew what they tried to do to you, he'd have scorched your old village from the map by now. Arya looked away, throat tight. What do you want, Kieran? For you to stop pretending this place is safe, he said. For you to admit that you've traded one kind of cage for another. He left her with that and walked on, nodding politely at a pair of nobles who bowed as he passed. The worst of it was that he never overstepped in ways anyone else would notice. He didn't touch her beyond the brush of fingers against a passing tray, didn't corner her in closed rooms where she could cry out later about impropriety. Every conversation took place in the open, with witnesses near enough to see but not to hear. At night, Arya lay awake in her new bed and felt the walls closing in. Between Damien's relentless protective orbit and Kieran's constant encroachments, there was no space left that was entirely her own. Her wolf, dulled for so long under the herbs, paced in circles now, restless and anxious. Alphas, attention, eyes on her from all directions. The animal part of her wanted one thing above all, safety for the vulnerable self that lay beneath the mask. The mask was starting to slip. The first time it happened, it was raining. A storm had rolled in off the sea, drumming against the windows and turning the sky outside Damien's council chamber the color of old iron. Inside, the fire cracked and spat as he argued with his advisors about supply routes and rising tensions along the border. Arya stood by the sideboard, quill and parchment in hand, recording the key points as he'd asked. The damp air made her hair frizz under her cap. The heat of too many bodies in one room made her lightheaded. Kieran had been granted a seat at the far end of the table to observe. He lounged with deceptive ease, occasionally offering a remark that made half the council bristle and Damien grit his teeth. If we shift the southern patrols any thinner, we invite testing, Lord Rain was saying. The rogues already sense weakness. They sense opportunity, Kieran drawled. There's a difference. One you've created by changing the old punishments. Modernizing your laws doesn't mean weakening them, Damien snapped. But you would know little about that. The eastern wilds are still beating thieves in public squares like it's the last century. Public consequences keep packs in line, Kieran replied, unoffended. Fear is a better leash than hope. Hope builds loyalty, Arya heard Damien say, almost before he seemed aware he'd spoken. Fear only builds resentment. Rain glanced toward her, surprised. Arya realized she'd tensed at Kieran's words, the quill stuttering on the parchment. She forced her shoulders to relax. The room felt too small. The rain louder. Her skin prickled beneath her dress. She'd taken her noon dose late, mouth rebelling at the bitterness, stomach churning. Now, under the twin pressures of proximity and stress, the fragile shield the herbs gave her real scent began to crack. It was so slight at first that she might have imagined it a loosening in the tight cage around her wolf, a breath drawn too deeply, the faintest ghost of warm, honeyed omega drifting into the air. Every head at the table turned toward Damien as he went absolutely motionless. His nostrils flared once, sharply. His eyes flashed gold, for the barest heartbeat, before he blinked it back to brown. The muscle in his jaw jumped. Arya. Her name came out rougher than usual. She nearly dropped the quill. Yes, my lord. Water, he said. For everyone. Her hands obeyed. Pouring, passing, moving gave her something to focus on besides the sudden, electric awareness humming under her skin. Kieran accepted his cup with a knowing little smile, eyes hooded. When she reached Damien's side, her fingers brushed his as she set the goblet down. It shouldn't have meant anything. A servant's mistake. A passing contact. Something in him snarled. Damien's hand closed around the stem with too much force, knuckles whitening. His gaze flicked to their joined fingers, then to her face. For an instant, the veneer of calm king cracked, and she saw the wolf beneath startled, hungry, furious at having something it didn't yet understand, dangled so close. She snatched her hand back. The scent that had bloomed wavered, smothered again under the herbs as panic kicked her body hard enough to jolt it. The room exhaled. The advisors resumed their bickering as if nothing had happened. But Damien didn't quite return to normal. He finished the meeting with a brittle efficiency that made even Kieran hold his tongue. As soon as the council was dismissed, he stood. Everyone out, he said. Arya, stay. Kieran paused in the doorway. Shall I? Out, Damien repeated, eyes never leaving Arya. The door shut behind the last advisor. Rain hammered the glass. Silence swelled. Come here, Damien said. She obeyed, heart thudding. He stepped closer, close enough that she could count the darker lashes framing his eyes. Something happened in there, he said quietly. Don't tell me it didn't. I felt it. I don't know what you mean, she said, because the alternative was too dangerous. His head tipped, wolf studying prey. For a moment, the room smelled different, new. His gaze dropped, nostrils flaring delicately as he took in the air around her. Not like the kitchens, or the laundry, or the herbs you always reek of. Her stomach dropped. He'd noticed even that. It's crowded in there, she said, forcing steadiness. Too many scents. I know my men, Damien said. I know their smells. I know the way a room feels after a fight, after laughter, after fear. His voice dipped lower. I have never known what a room feels like when you panic. Until today. He lifted his hand slowly, giving her time to step back. She didn't. His fingers brushed a strand of hair that had escaped her cap, tucking it behind her ear. She felt the warmth of his skin like a brand. Are you afraid of me? He asked. Sometimes, she whispered. Something pained flashed across his features. Good, you should be. She blinked, startled. I'm not a gentle man, Arya. His thumb hovered near her cheek but didn't touch. I lead packs into war. I've killed with these hands. I hold power that makes others bow whether they want to or not. His eyes darkened. And yet when I walked into that room and smelled something I couldn't name, the first thought wasn't about threat. It was... He cut himself off, jaw clenching. It was what? She breathed, against her better judgment. It was mine, he said, the word torn from somewhere raw. Like the air itself was claiming allegiance. Like the part of me I keep behind iron walls sat up and said, there, that, her. The confession left him breathing harder, as if he'd just crossed swords instead of spilled his guts. Arya's wolf howled silently under her skin, answering that unspoken call with terrifying eagerness. You're imagining it, she said, because denial was safer for both of them. The storm, the argument. You're tired. Maybe, he said, but I don't imagine things like this. His gaze trapped hers. If something about you is changing, I need to know. She almost laughed. It came out broken. Changing? I've been the same since the day I arrived. Have you? His eyes searched her face for a long moment, then he stepped back. You're dismissed. Go to the healer. Tell her you feel unwell. Have her examine you. She'll find nothing, Arya said. Then we'll know this is in my head, he replied, and I can start worrying about that instead. She wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him no, that she wouldn't put herself under yet another set of eyes that might see past her careful layers. But part of her tired, scared, slowly drowning under competing alpha attention, almost wanted someone else to name what she was too afraid to. I'll go, she said finally. Good. He watched her reach the door. And Arya? She paused. Yes. My lord, if Kieran corners you again, You come straight to me. I don't care who you have to walk away from. Understood? Her chest tightened at the fierce concern in his voice. Yes. The healer found a slight imbalance. Nothing serious. And prescribed more rest. More water. Less stress. When Arya asked cautiously about herbs, the woman frowned at the faint residue on her tongue and said she'd been taking too much of something she shouldn't need. Whatever you think you're hiding, the healer had said, oddly gentle, it will come out eventually. Better you guide that than be crushed when it does. She tossed the extra herb packet in the fire that night. The next day, the scent flashes came faster. In the corridor, when Damien brushed past her to speak to a guard, and the warmth of his body scraped every nerve raw. In his study, when their fingers touched over a shared document. On the stair, when Kieran appeared at the top just as Damien started up from the bottom and she, trapped between them, felt her wolf strain toward the stronger presence like a needle finding north. Each time, the air thickened with something sweet and vulnerable and unmistakably hers before snapping closed again under a layer of cold fear. Each time, Damien's eyes darkened, his shoulders squared, his voice roughened by degrees. Each time, Kieran watched and smiled. By the end of the week, Arya's carefully maintained disguise wasn't just failing, it was crumbling. And with every crack that appeared, the two alphas circling her grew sharper, more dangerous, more certain that whatever she was, whatever she meant, neither of them intended to let the other have it. By the time the first snows dusted the outer walls, no one in the castle pretended not to see it anymore. Wherever Arya went, the alphas followed, sometimes one at a time, sometimes together, sometimes circling each other at opposite ends of a room, the air tight and sharp between them as if their wolves were pacing invisible lines on the floor. In the training yard, it began with a friendly spar. Arya shouldn't have been there. Her new duties kept her mostly inside the royal wing, but Damien had sent for her mid-morning with a short, brusque message. Bring water and towels to the yard. No explanation. By the time she stepped into the cold air, basket in hand, the ring was already surrounded. Warriors lined the fence, faces eager. Snow had been trampled into dirty slush under their boots. In the center, Damien and Kieran faced each other stripped to the waist, muscles corded, breath steaming. Wooden practice blades gleamed with sweat where they'd already bitten into flesh. Again, Damien said. You sure? Kieran wiped a trail of blood from his lip with the back of his hand, grinning. Wouldn't want to tire you out. You have a kingdom to run. A maid to guard. A murmur rippled through the watching men. Damien's jaw clenched. Again. They crashed together with a thud that made Arya's teeth vibrate. This wasn't training. This was war with rules. Each strike was a question, each parry an answer. Damien drove Kieran back with ruthless efficiency, exploiting every opening. Kieran yielded ground like a man dancing around a cliff edge dangerously close, never quite falling. You're distracted, Kieran taunted breathlessly as their blades locked. Keep looking over my shoulder. Afraid she'll run while you're busy showing off? Damien's eyes flicked once, involuntarily, toward the edge of the yard where Arya stood. In that sliver of inattention, Kieran twisted, hooked his leg, and sent him crashing into the slush. A shout went up. Arya's stomach lurched. Kieran didn't press the advantage. He stepped back, offering a mock salute with his sword. Careful, your majesty, long way to fall from a throne. Damien rose in one smooth movement, opening his hand. The practice blade dropped into the snow with a dull thud. He looked at Kieran the way a storm looks at a tree. Again, he said, without toys. Someone hissed in a breath. Bare-handed sparring was one step shy of a dominance challenge. Kieran's grin widened. He tossed his own blade aside. Been waiting for that all morning. What followed wasn't graceful. It was brutal. Fists, elbows, the crack of bone against bone. Arya flinched with each impact, but she couldn't look away. They were evenly matched in strength. Damien had the edge in discipline, Kieran in unpredictability. Twice, Kieran went down and rolled back up before Damien could pin him. Once he landed a hit that snapped Damien's head to the side, hard enough for blood to bead at the corner of his mouth. Damien didn't even wipe it away. He drove forward until he had Kieran on his back in the slush, forearm braced across his throat. The yard went silent. Kieran's hands flexed against Damien's arm, testing the hold, then fell still. His wolf showed in his eyes, resentful, restless, but not ready to push this into a full challenge. Yield, Damien said quietly. Fine, Kieran rasped. You're stronger. The kingdom weeps with relief. Damien held him a second longer, making sure everyone had seen, then pushed off and stood. His gaze went immediately to Arya. Their eyes met. Something hot and reckless surged in her chest. He was bleeding because of her. For her. In council, the competition was subtler but no less vicious. Damien would argue for extending protections to smaller human villages. Kieran would counter with talk of costs and strength and not training subjects to think they can survive without their alpha. "And what does your maid think?" Kieran asked one afternoon, eyes gleaming as they flicked to where Arya stood at the edge of the room. "She's closer to their world than ours." The table turned, curious. Damien leaned back. "You live under my rule. You walk through their streets when we don't. Tell us how it feels." The quiet weight behind the words made it clear this wasn't just about policy. He was offering her space, a claim. Arya's throat went dry. "The villages near the eastern road, like the extra patrols," she said carefully. "They don't like the higher taxes that came with them. Some wonder if the crown remembers their names or only the coin they send." A few advisors bristled. "We raised the levy by a single %," Rain said stiffly. "Which is one loaf less on a table that was never full to begin with," Arya replied. Silence. Damien's mouth curved slightly. "Adjust the levy. Find another place to tighten the belt that doesn't put it around a farmer's throat." Meeting adjourned. As the men filed out, Kieran paused beside her. "Careful," he murmured. "Today it's levies. Tomorrow he'll be asking you which generals to trust. That kind of favor paints a target on your back. He won't let anyone touch her." Damien's voice came from behind them. Kieran smiled. "See? Always hovering." By week's end, Arya had become the center of something she couldn't control. Every room she entered crackled with tension. Every glance between the two alphas carried threat. She started planning her escape in the dark hours before dawn, mapping routes through the castle, counting coins she'd saved, calculating how far she could run before they noticed she was gone. Because staying meant bloodshed, and she refused to be the reason men died. Chapter 6. The Ultimatum. Kieran found her in the library 2 nights later. She'd come seeking solitude, a few stolen minutes away from watching eyes. Instead, she found him waiting in the shadows between the shelves, as if he'd known exactly where she'd run. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Arya's hand tightened on the book she'd been pretending to read. "If Damien finds you here..." "He won't. He's in council for another hour." Kieran stepped closer. "And by then, you and I will have reached an understanding." "What kind of understanding?" His expression was almost gentle. "The kind where you stop pretending this ends well if you stay." Her stomach nodded. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." He gestured to the window where snow fell in thick, silent curtains. "You're an Omega, hiding in an Alpha King's castle. Sooner or later, your disguise will fail completely. And when it does, Damien will have 2 choices: claim you publicly, or lose you to someone who will." "He wouldn't." "He already is," Kieran interrupted. "Every dominance display, every time he puts you in front of his council, every moment he keeps you close, he's claiming you without saying the words. But claim without choice is just another cage, Arya. You know that." She did. Gods help her, she did. "What do you want?" she whispered. "I want you to leave with me, tonight." His voice was urgent now, low and fierce. "I have horses ready, supplies packed. We can be across the border by dawn. In the wilds, you'll be free. No herbs, no hiding, no Alpha King deciding your future for you." "And you?" she asked. "What would I be to you?" "Whatever you choose to be," he said. "Packmate, advisor, friend, or more, if you wanted. But it would be your choice. Always." It sounded like salvation. It sounded like another trap. "I can't just leave," Arya said. "Damien would..." "Would what? Hunt you down? Force you back?" Kieran's eyes hardened. "Exactly. Because he doesn't see you as a person with the right to choose. He sees you as his. And the longer you stay, the tighter that grip becomes." "You're wrong about him." "Am I?" Kieran pulled something from his pocket, a small vial of clear liquid. "Recognize this? Scent suppressant. The strongest kind. I had it made for you because yours is failing and you know it. But here's the thing, even this won't hold much longer. A week, maybe 2. Then everyone will know what you are." Fear clawed up her throat. "How did you..." "I've known since the market," he said. "Your scent broke through for just a moment when I surprised you. I've been Omega aware since I was 16. I know the signs." Arya's legs felt weak. "If you've known all along, why wait until now?" "Because I wanted to give you time to see the truth yourself." his expression gentled. But time's run out, so here's my offer. Leave with me tonight, or I tell Damien exactly what you are tomorrow morning in front of his entire court. The world tilted. You wouldn't. I would. Because watching you slowly destroy yourself with herbs and fear while two alphas fight over you like your territory to be won, I can't stand by for that. He pressed the vial into her hand. This buys you a few more days to decide. But Arya, if you're still here when it runs out, I'm forcing the issue. Better you're exposed and free to choose than hidden and powerless. That's not choice, she said, voice shaking. That's blackmail. That's necessity. Kieran stepped back toward the shadows. Meet me at the east gate at midnight if you want out. If you don't come, I'll assume you've chosen your cage. And tomorrow, everyone will know why the Alpha King can't let you go. He disappeared between the shelves, leaving her alone with the vial clutched in her trembling hand and a choice that felt like no choice at all. Stay and risk exposure, humiliation, losing any control over her own fate. Or run with a man she barely trusted to a freedom that might just be another form of captivity. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the world in silent white. And somewhere in the castle, Damien sat in council, unaware that the fragile balance they'd built was about to shatter. Arya pressed her forehead against the cold glass and tried not to cry. The library felt smaller after Kieran left, as if his words had thickened the air and left no room for breath. Arya stared at the vial in her hand. The liquid inside caught the light in a faint, oily shimmer, a promise and a threat in one. A week. Maybe 2. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. If Kieran was right, and her body told her he was the herbs she'd used for years were failing. Every day, every look from Damien, every moment of heightened emotion made it harder to keep her Omega buried. The vial might buy time. It would not buy safety. Leave with me tonight, or I'll expose you. His voice wouldn't stop replaying in her head. She slid the vial into the hidden pocket she'd sewn into her skirt hem and forced her hands to still. Panic wouldn't help. She needed to think. Damien didn't summon her that evening, which was somehow worse. She spent the first half of the night pacing her small room in the royal wing, the second half sitting on the edge of her bed staring at the narrow window, watching snow drift past like ash. Midnight approached like a blade. Go, don't go. Choose. Arya pressed her palms over her eyes until stars burst behind them. Running with Kieran meant leaving everything she'd built here, the sliver of respect, the small measure of belonging, the dangerously warm thing unfurling in her chest whenever Damien looked at her like she was the only person in the room. Staying meant Kieran's promise. Threat. Tomorrow, the court. Tomorrow, exposure. Tomorrow, Damien's face, when he realized what she was and how long she'd lied. Tears stung. She shoved them back with anger. You did this to yourself, she whispered. You stayed. You let it get this far. Maybe she should have gone the first week, back when she was just a maid in gray and Damien was only a distant king with sharp eyes and a reputation for ruthlessness, before he'd stood in a council chamber and asked her what she thought, before he'd bled in the snow while his gaze kept flicking to her, before his hand had closed around her wrist like a promise he didn't know how to keep. The bells in the distant tower tolled midnight, muffled by the storm. Arya stood. Her feet carried her into the corridor before her mind could object. The castle was quiet at this hour, the torches banked low, shadows pooling thick in the corners. 2 guards stood at the end of the hall outside Damien's chambers, silhouettes relaxed but alert. She turned the other way. The path to the east gate burned in her memory 3 sets of stairs, 2 side passages, the long gallery overlooking the inner courtyard. She'd mapped it 100 times in her head, planning for a night she'd hoped would never come. Her breath puffed in thin clouds as she moved. Every step felt like walking deeper into a tunnel, with no guarantee of light at the end. The gallery overlooked the yard where Damien and Kieran had fought. Tonight it lay empty under a blanket of snow, moonlight turning the churned ground to pale silver. The east gate waited beyond, dark and solid. If Kieran was there, she couldn't see him from this height. Arya stopped halfway down the gallery. Her fingers curled around the cold stone of the window ledge. Leaving meant freedom, maybe. Or it meant trading one alpha's orbit for another's. At least Kieran was honest about wanting to use her for power as well as whatever else he felt. Damien hadn't admitted anything. Not yet, but his wolf had, like your mine. She squeezed her eyes shut. That wasn't something she could unknow. It lived in the space between her ribs now, as real and fragile as breath. What are you doing, Arya? She whispered to the empty hall. Running from one prison into another? The answer didn't come. Only the wind, and the distant creak of old stone settling in the cold. Her feet turned her around before her mind made a decision. She went back the way she'd come, pulse roaring in her ears, past the empty stairwells and shuttered windows, up the last flight to the royal wing. By the time she reached her door, her hands were shaking so hard she could barely fit the key in the lock. She didn't go to Kieran. She couldn't. When sleep finally dragged her under, she dreamed of two wolves circling each other in a ring of snow while she stood in the middle, unable to move as their teeth flashed closer and closer to her throat. Morning came too bright. The summons arrived with it. A junior servant knocked on her door before the first bell. "The king requests your presence in the great hall," the girl said, eyes wide. "He says to come at once." Arya's stomach dropped. The great hall? Not his study? "The hall," the girl repeated. "Everyone's gathering. Something's happening." Of course it was. She dressed with fumbling fingers, nearly tearing her apron ties twice, and forced herself to walk, not run, through the corridors. Voices grew louder as she neared the hall, dozens of them, layered in excitement and tension. The doors stood open. The space beyond seethed with bodies, nobles in bright winter silks, warriors in formal leathers, servants along the walls. At the far end, the dais waited empty. Arya slipped into her place near one of the pillars, trying to make herself smaller. It didn't work. Not today. Kieran stood near the front of the crowd, flanked by a few of his men. He was dressed with calculated simplicity, dark clothes that made his eyes look even paler. When he saw her, his brows lifted slightly. "You didn't come." She lifted her chin a fraction. "No." He gave the smallest of nods. Then his gaze slid past her, sharpening, as Damien entered from the side door and climbed the steps to the dais. The room quieted in waves, sound draining away until only the crackle of the fire filled the space. Damien wore black and steel, the formal version of himself that made everyone stand a little straighter. His crown was absent, he rarely wore it, but he didn't need metal on his head to look like a king. Authority rode his shoulders as easily as any cloak. His eyes found Arya almost immediately. For a heartbeat, the hall disappeared. It was just them, the way it had been in his study and the council chamber and a dozen other stolen moments. His gaze flicked over her face, searching, as if the answer to some question lay written in her expression. Then Kieran stepped forward. "Your Majesty," he said pleasantly, loud enough to carry. "Thank you for convening everyone on such short notice. There's a matter of truth I believe your court deserves to hear." Arya's blood turned to ice. Damien's jaw tightened. "I didn't convene them for you," he said, voice calm. "But since you're already speaking, this should be interesting. Go on." Kieran's gaze skimmed the room, letting the anticipation build. He looked very much like a man about to spring a trap he'd set with care. "There's been a deception in your household," he said. "A significant one. One that places your entire court at risk." Murmurs rippled. Arya's nails bit into her palms. Damien's eyes narrowed. "If you believe my people are in danger, you'll be specific." "I will." Kieran turned slowly, until he was looking straight at Arya. "You've all noticed, I'm sure, the king's sudden interest in one particular servant. The maid in the royal wing, the girl he drags into council, consults on policy, keeps near his side as if she were something more." Several heads turned toward her. The heat of their stares burned. Damien's voice dropped a fraction. "Choose your next words carefully, Kieran." "Gladly." Kieran took a step to the side, clearing the view between Damien and Arya. "You see, Your Majesty, she isn't just a maid. She isn't just clever or useful. She isn't just someone you've inexplicably decided to favor." He smiled, sharp and bright. "She's an Omega." The word dropped into the hall like a stone into still water, sending ripples of shock through every corner. Omega. For a single, stretched heartbeat, no one moved, no one breathed. Then the room exploded. Voices rose in overlapping waves, confusion, disbelief, outrage. Nobles turned to each other, demanding confirmation. Warriors shifted uneasily, hands drifting toward weapons out of pure instinct. The servants along the walls pressed back as if proximity to Arya might somehow contaminate them. Arya stood frozen, her world narrowing to the sound of her own pulse hammering in her ears. This was it. The moment she'd dreaded for 3 years, the exposure she'd poisoned herself to avoid, laid bare in front of 100 watching eyes. Damien hadn't moved from the dais. His expression was carved from stone, unreadable. but his hands gripped the armrests of his throne hard enough that the wood creaked audibly even over the chaos. "Silence," he said. The word wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of absolute command. The hall quieted immediately, though tension still hummed beneath the surface like a plucked string. Damien's gaze locked on Kieran. "You're accusing one of my household staff of deception based on what evidence?" "My own senses," Kieran replied smoothly. "I've been Omega aware since adolescence. I recognized what she was the moment I met her in the market, though she's been using suppressants to hide it." He gestured toward Arya. "Strong ones, judging by how well they've worked, but they're failing now. Any wolf with decent senses can catch flashes of her true scent if they're paying attention." Several of the nobles exchanged glances. A few sniffed the air experimentally, as if trying to confirm Kieran's claim. Arya felt their attention like claws scraping her skin. "She's been living here for 3 years, Kieran continued, his tone almost sympathetic. "Working in your household, moving through your castle, all while concealing her nature. That's not just deception, Your Majesty. It's a violation of pack law. Omegas must register, must be accounted for. She's done neither." "She's human," someone called from the crowd. "Humans can't be Omegas." "She's wolf," Kieran corrected. "Just very good at hiding it." The murmurs started again, louder this time. Arya's legs felt weak. Her hands trembled at her sides. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But there was nowhere to go. The exits were blocked by bodies. And even if she made it past them, where would she flee? The castle, the city, the entire territory, all of it, was Damien's. "Arya," Damien's voice cut through the noise. Not angry, not cold, just her name, weighted with something she couldn't name. "Come here." Her feet moved before her mind could object, carrying her through the crowd that parted like water around a stone. Every step felt like walking to an execution. Faces blurred past, some curious, some disgusted, some calculating what her exposure meant for their own positions. She stopped at the base of the dais, forcing herself to meet Damien's eyes. What she saw there stole her breath. Not fury, not betrayal, something fierce and protective and barely restrained. "Is it true?" he asked quietly, though his voice carried to every corner of the hall. "Are you an Omega?" There was no point lying now. Not with Kieran's accusation hanging in the air, not with 100 wolves about to test the claim with their own senses. "Yes," she whispered. The admission seemed to break something in the room. Shocked exclamations rose again. Someone cursed. A woman laughed, high and disbelieving. And then, as if summoned by the truth itself, the herbs failed completely. Arya felt it happen, a sudden loosening in her chest, a barrier crumbling that she'd maintained through sheer will and bitter doses for 3 long years. The suppressants that had dulled her scent, hidden her nature, kept her safe, simply gave out. Her true scent bloomed into the hall like spring after a hard winter. Soft, sweet, undeniably, unmistakably Omega. The effect was instantaneous. Every wolf in the room went rigid. Nostrils flared. Eyes flashed gold. The alphas, and there were at least a dozen scattered through the crowd, reacted most strongly, their bodies going taut with instinctive response to a fertile, unclaimed Omega suddenly revealed in their midst. Damien inhaled sharply, his pupils dilating until his eyes were more gold than brown. His fingers tightened on the throne's arms. And for a moment, Arya saw his control waver, saw the wolf beneath the crown surge forward with violent possessiveness. "She's unmated," someone said, voice rough with hunger. "Unclaimed." "She's ripe," another added. "Her scent gods." "She's mine," Damien snarled. The word tore from him with the force of a thunderclap, backed by so much alpha dominance that half the room flinched. He was on his feet before Arya registered the movement, descending the dais steps in 3 long strides, placing himself between her and the crowd like a living shield. "She is mine," he repeated, quieter now but no less absolute. "My mate, my Omega, under my protection and my claim." The declaration sent fresh shock rippling through the hall. This was more than favoritism, more than political maneuvering. This was a formal public claim, the kind that carried weight in both wolf law and tradition. Kieran's expression shifted, calculation replacing his earlier confidence. "Your Majesty, with respect, she's unbonded. You can't claim what hasn't chosen you." "She has chosen," Damien said, not looking away from the crowd. "Every day she stayed. Every moment she trusted me with pieces of her truth. That was her choice." "Was it?" Kieran stepped forward, addressing the room rather than the king. Or was she simply trapped? A frightened Omega hiding in the only safe place she could find, with an Alpha who grew obsessed without understanding why? He paused, letting the words sink in. She never had the freedom to choose. She only had survival. The accusation hung heavy. Several nobles nodded slowly, as if Kieran's logic made sense. Arya's voice cracked through the tension. That's not true. Every eye turned to her. She stood just behind Damien's shoulder, small and pale but with her chin lifted, refusing to cower. I stayed because I wanted to, she said, louder this time. Not because I had no choice. I could have run 100 times, could have left with you that night in the library, but I didn't. Her gaze found Kieran's, because staying here, with him, felt less like a cage than anything you offered. Kieran's jaw tightened. You don't know what you're saying. The bond hasn't formed yet. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking perfectly clearly, Arya shot back. Clearer than I have in years. Damien's hand found hers, fingers threading through hers with deliberate gentleness despite the violent tension radiating from his frame. She has chosen, he said again, his voice carrying the finality of a judge's verdict. The bond will be formalized at her pace. Not mine. Not yours. Hers. For a moment, Arya thought Kieran might concede, might accept the loss and walk away. Then he smiled, sharp and dangerous. I invoke the right of challenge, he said clearly. The hall went deathly silent. Damien's grip on Arya's hand tightened briefly before releasing. You can't be serious. Ancient law, Kieran replied. Still binding. An unmated Omega may be claimed by any Alpha willing to fight for the right. You've declared your intention. I'm declaring mine. Let combat decide who is worthy. She's not a prize to be won, Damien said, voice low and lethal. Then prove it. Kieran spread his hands. Prove that your claim is about her choice, not your possession. Fight me. Win, and she's yours with the law's blessing. Lose, and she comes with me where she'll have genuine freedom to choose her path. Arya's stomach dropped. No. Damien, you don't have to. Yes, Damien interrupted, his eyes never leaving Kieran's. I do. He looked at her then, and what she saw in his face made her chest ache. If this is what it takes to give you choice that no one can question, to make sure you're free in every way that matters, then I'll fight. This is insane, she whispered. This is pack law, Kieran said. Older than kingdoms. The challenge has been issued and accepted. We fight at sunset in the main yard, barehanded, to submission or yield. The winner claims the right to court the Omega. She remains free to refuse, but no other Alpha may challenge without defeating the victor first. The formality of his words gave them weight. This wasn't a brawl. It was ritual. Ancient and binding. Damien's expression was granite. Sunset, then. Clear the yard. The crowd began to disperse, buzzing with speculation and excitement. A dominance fight between two Alphas over an Omega. It was the kind of spectacle that would be talked about for years. Arya stood, rooted to the spot as bodies flowed around her. Damien caught her arm gently. Come. We need to talk before this begins. She let him guide her from the hall, through side passages and upstairs, until they reached his private study. The door closed behind them with a heavy thud, muffling the castle's chaos. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Damien crossed to her, cupping her face in both hands with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with the violence brewing in his eyes. I'm sorry, he said roughly. I should have handled this differently. Should have protected you better. This isn't your fault, Arya managed. I'm the one who lied, who hid. You survived, he corrected. There's a difference. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. And now I'm going to make sure you can stop hiding, no matter what it costs. What if you lose? The question tore from her throat. What if Kieran... I won't lose. The certainty in his voice was absolute. Not when I'm fighting for you. Sunset came too quickly. The main yard had been cleared and ringed with torches that cast dancing shadows across the packed snow. The entire castle seemed to have gathered nobles in their furs, warriors lining the fence, servants crowding the walls and windows for a glimpse of what was about to unfold. Arya stood at the edge of the ring, flanked by two of Damien's most trusted guards, not to keep her prisoner, but to keep the crowd back. Already she could feel eyes on her, could smell the interest from unmated Alphas, who were calculating whether they might challenge the winner. Damien entered from the east gate, stripped to the waist despite the cold. His body was a map of old scars and hard-earned muscle, his movements fluid and controlled. When his gaze found hers across the yard, something in her chest clenched painfully. Kieran emerged from the west, equally bare, equally ready. He rolled his shoulders, testing his range of motion, then offered Damien a mocking salute. An elder wolf stepped into the center, voice carrying across the assembly. The challenge has been issued and accepted under ancient rite. The combat will continue until one yields or cannot rise. The victor earns the right of courtship. The Omega's ultimate choice remains her own, protected by law. Do both parties understand and accept these terms? Yes, Damien said. Accepted, Kieran agreed. The elder withdrew. The yard held its breath. Then Kieran moved. He was faster than Arya expected, closing the distance in a blur and striking high. Damien deflected, countered with a blow aimed at Kieran's ribs that landed with a meaty thud. They broke apart, circling. This wasn't like the sparring match in the training yard. This was real. This was brutal. They came together again in a clash of flesh and bone that made Arya flinch. Damien fought with cold precision, every strike calculated. Kieran fought like water, flowing around defenses and exploiting openings with vicious efficiency. Blood appeared split lip, gashed eyebrow, knuckles torn and raw. The snow beneath their feet turned pink, then red. Arya couldn't look away, couldn't breathe. Every time one of them went down, her heart stopped until they rose again. Damien took a hit to the jaw that snapped his head sideways. He spat blood and drove forward, tackling Kieran into the snow and raining blows down with relentless fury. Kieran twisted, got a leg up, and kicked Damien off with enough force to send him sprawling. Both staggered upright, breathing hard. You're going to kill yourself over a girl who'll never truly be yours, Kieran panted. She'll always wonder if she chose, or if the bond chose for her. Then I'll spend every day proving it was her choice, Damien growled, and lunged again. The fight went on minutes that felt like hours. Both alphas refusing to yield, refusing to fall. Arya's nails bit into her palms hard enough to draw blood. She wanted to scream at them to stop, wanted to throw herself between them and end this madness. But she couldn't. This was pack law. This was ritual. Interrupting would invalidate everything. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Damien got Kieran pinned, forearm across his throat, knee braced on his chest. Kieran struggled, bucking and twisting, but he couldn't break free. Yield, Damien rasped. Kieran's eyes blazed defiance. Then, slowly, they slid to where Arya stood. Whatever he saw in her face made something in his expression crack. I yield, he said hoarsely. Damien held him a moment longer, making sure, then released him and stood. He swayed, barely staying upright, blood dripping from a dozen wounds. The elder stepped forward. The challenge is complete. Alpha Damien is victor and holds the right of courtship. He turned to Arya. The law recognizes his claim. Do you accept? Every eye turned to her. This was it. The moment of choice, public and binding. Arya stepped forward, ignoring the guards' attempts to hold her back. She crossed the yard to where Damien stood, battered and bleeding, and looking at her like she was the only thing keeping him standing. I accept, she said clearly. Then, softer, just for him. I choose you. I've always chosen you. His eyes closed briefly, relief washing over his face. When he opened them again, they burned with gold, fire, and something deeper. Something that looked almost like love. And I choose to let you choose, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Not because the law says I won, not because the bond demands it, but because you deserve that freedom. Today, tomorrow, always. He took her hand, raised it to his lips, and pressed a kiss to her knuckles that felt like a vow. The crowd erupted in cheers and shouts, but Arya heard none of it. There was only Damien, bloody and victorious, and hers, looking at her like she'd just given him the world. And maybe she had. The yard emptied slowly, like a tide pulling back from shore after a storm. Snow was trampled into red-streaked slush where Damien and Kieran had fought. The torches along the walls guttered in the rising wind, their smoke curling into a sky heavy with more snow. Voices buzzed around Arya in a muffled blur. Excitement, relief, a few notes of disappointment from those who'd hoped for a different outcome. It all sounded very far away. Damien swayed beside her, still bare-chested in the cold. His skin smeared with blood and dirt. Up close, the damage was worse than it had looked from the edge of the ring. One eye already swelling, a cut along his cheekbone. Ribs mottled with bruises that would be dark by morning. His breath came shallow and rough. You need a healer, Arya said. I need a minute, he replied, and somehow still managed to sound like a king despite looking like he'd barely survived a war. She threaded her arm around his waist, taking as much of his weight as she could. He stiffened at first, pride warring with exhaustion, then relented and leaned into her. The warmth of him seeped through her dress, grounding her. Walk with me, he murmured. Away from them. She guided him toward the side gate that led to the private gardens. The guards started to follow, but Damien waved them back with a sharp gesture. For once, they obeyed without question. The garden was quiet, blanketed in fresh snow that muffled their footsteps. They stopped beneath a stone archway covered in dormant vines, out of sight from the castle windows. Damien sagged against the pillar, head tipped back, eyes closed. You're insane, Arya whispered. You could have been killed. Worth it. His voice was rough, scraped raw, to make sure no one could question your right to choose. I'd already chosen you. His eyes opened, gold fading back to brown, and the vulnerability in them stole her breath. Had you? Really? Or were you just trapped with the least terrible option? She stepped closer, until there was no space between them, and took his battered face in her hands. I chose you the night you waited for me in that corridor. I chose you when you paid my brother's debt without asking for anything in return. I chose you every single time you looked at me like I mattered. Her voice broke. I chose you, Damien. Long before tonight, something in his expression cracked open. He pulled her against him with a sound that was half groan, half relief, burying his face in her hair. Say it again. I choose you, she whispered against his chest. I choose you. His arms tightened around her, careful despite his injuries, as if she were something precious he'd fought too hard to win. They stood like that while snow began to fall again in soft, silent flakes, covering the world in fresh white. The bond, he said finally, voice muffled. It wants to complete. Can you feel it? She could. A pull low in her chest, insistent and warm, urging her closer even though there was no closer to get. Her wolf whined softly, wanting to seal what had been claimed in blood and choice. Yes, she admitted. But not here. Not like this, when you're half dead and freezing. He pulled back just enough to look at her, a faint smile tugging at his mouth despite the split in his lip. Practical, even now. One of us has to be. The healer fussed over him for an hour, stitching cuts and wrapping ribs while muttering about foolish alphas and ancient laws that should have died centuries ago. Arya stayed close, holding his hand when the needle bit deep, ignoring the healer's pointed looks that suggested she should leave and let the king be tended in private. By the time they were alone again in his chambers, night had fully fallen. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light over stone walls and rich fabrics. Damien stood by the window, freshly bandaged, staring out at the snow-covered city below. Arya came to stand beside him. What happens now? Now, he said slowly. We do this right. No more hiding. No more herbs. You move into the Queen's chambers. We formalize the bond in front of the court, and we start changing laws that treat Omegas like property instead of people. Her throat tightened. That's a lot to promise. Then watch me keep every word. He turned to face her fully. I want you as my mate, Arya. Not because instinct demands it or law allows it, but because I can't imagine ruling this kingdom without you beside me. Because when I think about the future, you're in every version of it that doesn't feel empty. His hand came up, cupping her jaw. Will you have me? Truly? As mate and king and fool who loves you more than is probably wise. The word love hung between them, precious and fragile. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. He kissed her then, careful of his split lip, and the bond flared to life between them like a struck match. It burned through her chest, golden and inevitable, sealing what had already been written in every choice they'd made, every risk they'd taken, every moment they'd chosen each other against all logic and law. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard, eyes flashing gold. The bond is complete, Damien said, wonder threading through his voice. I can feel you. Your emotions. Your presence. Like you've always been part of me and I just didn't know what was missing. Arya felt it too, the certainty of him settled into her bones, warm and unshakable. I feel it. They stood together in the firelight, newly bonded, and began planning how to reshape a kingdom that had never imagined an Omega Queen. 3 months later, the first reforms passed the council. Omegas would no longer be required to register like property. They could own land, refuse arranged matings, and serve in any position their skills warranted. The laws weren't perfect, centuries of tradition didn't vanish overnight, but they were a beginning. Arya sat beside Damien at the high table during the signing, wearing the queen's circlet he'd placed on her head the morning after their bonding. She still wasn't used to the weight of it, but she was learning. Kieran attended the ceremony, as was his right as a visiting alpha. He approached them afterward, his expression carefully neutral. "Your Majesty, Your Grace." He bowed to each of them. "The reforms are progressive. They're overdue," Damien replied coolly. Kieran's gaze slid to Arya. "I hope you find what you were looking for." "I already have," she said quietly. "But thank you for pushing when we needed pushing." Something like regret flickered across his face. Then he inclined his head and walked away, his men falling into step behind him. "Do you think he'll challenge again?" Arya asked, watching him go. "No," Damien said. "He's too smart for that. And I think, in his own way, he actually wanted you to be happy. He just assumed you couldn't be happy here." He was wrong. Damien's hand found hers beneath the table, fingers threading through hers. Yes, he was. As the sun set over the castle, painting the snow-covered grounds in shades of gold and rose, Arya looked out over the kingdom she would help rule and felt, for the first time in her life, like she had finally come home. Not because she'd found safety in the shadow of a powerful alpha, but because she'd found an equal who saw her strength and chose to build something better beside her. And that, she thought, was worth every risk she'd taken to get here. Would you fight for love a second time if the past you ran from came back to claim what it believed it owned? What would you do in Arya's position, stand and fight, or disappear before the battle even begins?